There are places in the world where history did not happen gradually, where it crashed in all at once: conquest, slavery, revolution, and resurrection, across just a few centuries. Places where cultures from 4 continents were forced together, ground against each other, and out of that collision produced something so original, so resilient, and so globally powerful that it changed everything it touched. That place is the Caribbean. And this is its story. From the first indigenous peoples to walk these islands to the streaming playlists of 2026, this is the full history of Caribbean culture. Part 1. The first people, the Taino, Arawak, and Carib. Long before any European ship appeared on the horizon, the Caribbean islands were alive with sophisticated human civilization. The Taino people, part of the larger Arawak linguistic group, had been settled in the Greater Antilles for over 1,000 years when Christopher Columbus arrived in 1492. They cultivated cassava, corn, sweet potatoes, and squash. They developed canoe technology capable of navigating hundreds of miles of open ocean. They built villages with central plazas for communal ceremonies called aritos, celebrations involving music, dance, and storytelling that were the ancestor of the public cultural gatherings the Caribbean still holds today. The Kalinago people, often called Caribs by Europeans, occupied the Lesser Antilles and were far more resistant to European intrusion. It is from the word Carib that both Caribbean and, through linguistic distortion, the word cannibal derive. The latter a reputation largely constructed by European colonizers to justify violence. The Taino had a word for this island world: Ayatai, Haiti; Zamaka, Jamaica; Cuba, Borican, Puerto Rico. Their names survived even when much of their population did not. The arrival of Spanish colonizers from 1492 onward brought catastrophic disease: smallpox, measles, typhus, to which the indigenous peoples had no immunity. Within decades, the Taino population collapsed from an estimated 250,000 to near extinction. But their cultural legacy persists in Caribbean food, language, place names, and spiritual practices carried forward through the mixed communities that developed in subsequent centuries. Part 2. The Colonial Era. 5 empires, 1 region. No other region in the world was colonized by as many competing European empires simultaneously. Spain arrived first and claimed the entirety of the Caribbean. Then Portugal, Britain, France, the Netherlands, and even Denmark and Sweden claimed their own territories. The result is a region where neighboring islands can speak entirely different languages, practice different religions, eat different foods, and carry entirely different colonial histories, all within sight of each other across a strip of water. The British colonized Jamaica in 1655, Barbados in the early 1600s, and dozens of other islands. The French established powerful presences in Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Saint-Domingue, the western half of Hispaniola. The Dutch controlled Curaçao, Saint Martin, and Suriname. Danish influence extended to what are now the U.S. Virgin Islands, leaving behind place names like Christiansted and Charlotte Amalie. The Spanish maintained Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic. This multi-empire patchwork created the Caribbean's extraordinary linguistic and cultural diversity, a diversity that still defines the region today. The engine of the colonial Caribbean was sugar. By the 17th and 18th centuries, Caribbean sugar plantations were generating more wealth than almost any other industry in the world. British colonial economist William Beckford once noted that the island of Barbados generated more tax revenue for the British Crown than all the North American colonies combined. That wealth was built entirely on the forced labor of enslaved Africans, over 4 million of whom were transported to the Caribbean over the course of the transatlantic slave trade, the largest forced migration in human history. Part 3. The African Diaspora and the Birth of Creole Culture. The most transformative cultural force in Caribbean history is the African diaspora. Enslaved people brought to these islands came from dozens of different African nations: Yoruba, Akan, Igbo, Fon, Mandinka, and many others, speaking different languages, practicing different religions, carrying different musical traditions and foodways. Stripped of their names, their families, and their legal personhood, they nonetheless maintained cultural continuity through memory, music, and religion. The result was creolization, a process of cultural mixing that produced entirely new forms of language, religion, music, and identity. Jamaican patois was not broken English. It was a new language that West African grammar had shaped. Haitian Vodou was not European superstition. It was a sophisticated spiritual system in which African orishas survived under Catholic saint names, adapted to new geography. Trinidad's carnival was born from the same process. African performance traditions surviving inside European masquerade customs and emerging transformed, more powerful than either source alone. Resistance was a constant. The Haitian Revolution of 1791 was the most successful slave rebellion in history, producing in 1804 the world's first black republic and the first nation in the Western Hemisphere to permanently abolish slavery. Haiti's revolution sent shockwaves through every slaveholding society in the Americas. Jamaican Maroon communities, free African people who had escaped slavery and fought the British to a negotiated standstill in the Blue Mountains, maintained autonomous territory within colonial Jamaica for over a century. Marcus Garvey, born in Jamaica in 1887, built the largest black political movement in history from a Caribbean foundation, planting seeds that would grow into the civil rights movements of the 20th century. Part 4. Emancipation, Indenture, and the Making of Modern Culture. British emancipation came in 1834, with full freedom in 1838. French and Dutch emancipation followed over subsequent decades. But freedom was not accompanied by economic justice. Formerly enslaved people received no land, no compensation, and no political rights. The plantation owners, remarkably, received financial compensation for the loss of their property. Britain's emancipation loan, taken out to pay slave owners, was not fully repaid by British taxpayers until 2015. To replace the labor of freed people who refused to work plantation land, colonial governments brought indentured workers from India, China, and Madeira. The Indian diaspora in particular had an enormous cultural impact, especially in Trinidad, Guyana, and Jamaica. Nearly half of Trinidad's population today traces its ancestry to South Asia. The result is a Caribbean culture that carries African, European, South Asian, and East Asian threads, all woven together in the remarkable tapestry of Creole identity. Independence movements swept the Caribbean in the 20th century. Jamaica and Trinidad both gained independence from Britain in 1962. Barbados in 1966. Cuba, under Fidel Castro's 1959 revolution, charted a radically different path. Haiti had been independent since 1804. The French Antilles, Martinique, and Guadeloupe remain French overseas departments to this day, with the euro as their currency. The political map of the Caribbean reflects the complexity of decolonization, with some islands still territories, some fully independent, and some, like Puerto Rico, occupying an ambiguous status between colony and commonwealth that remains politically contested. Part 5. Caribbean Culture Today, A Force the World Follows. Today, Caribbean culture is more globally influential than at any point in its history. The music that began in sound system yards in 1950s Kingston is now the architecture of global pop. Reggaeton, built on Jamaican dancehall rhythms, is the most streamed genre in the world. Caribbean carnival culture has been adopted by cities from Rio de Janeiro to Rotterdam. Caribbean food is experiencing a global culinary renaissance, with chefs from the diaspora reinterpreting Creole cuisine for the world's finest restaurants. Caribbean writers have won the Nobel Prize in Literature, St. Lucia's Derek Walcott in 1992, and Trinidad's V.S. Naipaul in 2001. Caribbean athletes have broken world records, won Olympic gold medals, and defined entire sporting eras. The Caribbean diaspora, communities in London, New York, Toronto, Miami, Paris, and Amsterdam, has produced prime ministers, artists, scientists, entrepreneurs, and cultural leaders who shape the societies they live in. The Caribbean's cultural confidence today is rooted in the knowledge of what it survived. These are islands that should, by any historical measure, have been broken. Instead, they produced calypso and reggae, doubles and jerk, carnival and Notting Hill, Bob Marley and Usain Bolt, Derek Walcott and Marcus Garvey. They produced, from the absolute worst circumstances, A culture that the rest of the world is still trying to understand and absorb. The history of Caribbean culture is not a comfortable story. It is built on colonization, slavery, exploitation, and resistance. But what makes it one of the great human stories is what those people did with that history. They did not let it define them as victims. They defined it, reshaped it, and turned it into music, food, language, art, and identity that the world will be listening to, tasting, dancing to, and studying for centuries to come. From colonization to today, the Caribbean's cultural journey is one of the most extraordinary stories on Earth.